It's easy to misunderstand the frontier in the 18th century and early 19th century here in North America. We think about, and we've seen portrayed in books, in movies, and television, the rugged individual, the man taking on the frontier by himself. And I don't think it was like that very often at all. We read over and over in accounts and journals of that time period that the men that went out into the frontier usually went out in groups. They went out in parties, as it were, groups of men, 3, 6, 9, 12 men at a time, maybe more. And early on, they went out in hunting parties. They went out to survey the land, to explore it, to hunt, to bring back hides, to have an idea about what there was. But they didn't do that alone. Sometimes they became alone. Other people left and they would stay, and they might be alone for a time. Daniel Boone was certainly alone for a time in the wilderness, but he was glad to get back in community with the other men. And when it came time to settle, it was time for families to come to the frontier. And they came in not single families, but groups of families at a time. 6 families or 10 families, all at a time, moving out to the frontier. And they did this, they lived in community, not as individuals, because it was a harsh environment to live in. It was difficult, impossible as an individual to live in an environment like that. If one little injury could endanger your life, the nature was not helpful in a lot of different situations. It's very, very difficult. And it was a place of clash of cultures. There was warfare, one type or another going on throughout this whole time period. How do you survive that kind of situation? You survive it in community. The rugged individual, well, there weren't that many, and they many times didn't live that long because it was such an impossible place. Today, sometimes we think we can live as individuals, as an island, as it were, and walk through life as an individual. But just like the people in the 18th century, we have to have community, because even though maybe the natural world isn't as harsh today as it was then, we still live in a difficult environment, even if that environment is only up in our heads. We have to have community. We have to come together like those men and those families in that late 18th century, early 19th century time period, in that frontier time period, because we're always exploring in one way or another a new kind of frontier. Why do we spend so much time studying this place and time, a frontier and the late 1700s, early 1800s? They did amazing things, and they did it with very little or nothing. Compared to what we have today, the conditions couldn't be more primitive. There's a great struggle going on here. These families, and I think in Daniel Boone's memoirs, he really does sort of bring that idea out when he says that even with all the dangers, he's so excited to bring his family out to this frontier because in a sense for him, it was a kind of a paradise. He couldn't wait to get back here with his family, even though that sometimes it didn't mean just hardship. It meant death. He lost sons and brothers in this struggle. And yet, with what very, very little they had, they succeeded. we certainly today, even though we are always, waking up to a new frontier, as it were, in the modern world, and maybe we don't feel equipped for that, and sometimes we aren't equipped for that, we can look at those struggles as they were so much more difficult in maybe different ways. And we can see that success and know that we can do that too. But we have to do it in community. It's the way we will get through whatever the future's going to bring to us. We study, we read, we look at images from the time period. Sometimes we put ourselves in their shoes in this time period. We build cabins and we go camping and we use exactly the same things they had. So we know just how difficult it could be, and we sometimes find that kernel of just how good it can be. And we do this in groups, right? We do this in groups of 5 and 10 and 100 or 500 at a time, because we're trying to reach back into history and get a glimpse of what that was like. So we can step back, we can take off our old clothes and put on our modern clothes and walk into the modern world and know that it can be done. Sometimes people ask why we do this, why we do what we do here on the channel, and why other people who are reenacting sometimes this time period and other time periods all around the world, why do they do it? We want to walk in their very footsteps, in their very shoes, to know just how hard it was, maybe just a little bit, but just how hard it was. We can read, we can study images, we can do all these things to put ourselves in that time period. And sometimes, sometimes we get the hardships. It can be hard sometimes when we try to do things, the old way. But we also can enjoy some of the very best parts of that. We can get a glimpse of why they would go through all those hardships. And most of the time, it is about the people that are there with you doing it. We take off our clothes and put on our modern clothing, and we step out into the modern world with a fresh, new idea of how we will succeed in the modern world. And again, that's with the people who are with us. So we've gone back and we tried to get just a glimpse of the 18th century. And I think it was beautiful. Daniel Boone thought it was beautiful. And maybe we've caught just a whiff of the wood smoke and just a taste of that roast venison. I hope you've enjoyed this little visit back in time. Thanks for watching.